Countering the two knights' defense. Side 1. This is a 90-minute cassette by Otto Hardy, and my intention is to introduce you to a system for white, effectively to combat this old and very popular defense for black in an open game. So, if we play the opening moves 1, e4, e5, 2, knight f3, knight c6, 3, bishop c4, black has a variety of replies to this move. Certainly, white has to reckon with the age-old bishop c5, inviting a standard gioco piano. But such is the evolution of modern chess theory that it's safe to say that this move is not to be recommended. White will have dangerous attacking prospects, with either b4 leading into the Evans gambit, or even the conventional move c3. The white moves come very natural and are easy to play, whilst black is walking a tightrope well into the middle game, and at best, I think, can look forward to a draw after an uphill struggle. So you're unlikely to find this move in modern tournament practice, certainly not amongst masters and grandmasters. Then there is a move 3, bishop e7, the Hungarian defense, or even the move d6. This is seen occasionally, but again would allow white a good hold on the center, and has the drawback of shutting in the black king's bishop. So white will maintain a small but niggling plus well into the middle game. In fact, black again will have to play very carefully to equalize at all. And this brings us to the two knights' defense, where black continues with 3, knight f6. Contrary to the other moves we've seen, this is very active. And the two knights defense is a very old defense, and for many decades it was practically taken for granted that white would now immediately jump in with 4, knight g5, to test the validity of the defense with an immediate assault against the vulnerable point f7. However, today it is well known that if white does this, black will have good chances of quite a dangerous initiative, either with an immediate d5, sacrificing a pawn for rapid development and active piece play, or even the ultra-sharp and increasingly popular bishop c5, called the Wilkes bar. And this leads to the most hair-raising early complications that tend to favor black in practice, especially as he is more likely to be prepared for all the tactics. So the move we will pursue on this tape is not 4, knight g5, but 4, d4. In my own games, I've often reached this position with the move order of the Scotch gambit: 1, e4, e5, 2, knight f3, knight c6, 3, d4, e takes d4, 4, bishop c4, and now knight f6. But whether you choose this move order or not, and are prepared to accept some of the possible side variations that may occur, is of course a matter of taste. Here, on this cassette, we will stay with the simple move order, and after the move 4d4, black will continue with 4e takes d4. Now once again, this is a very old, well-known position. Say white were now to proceed with 5 castles, black could then either steer the game into the Max Lange with bishop c5, or simply play knight takes e4. Both these main branches have been exhaustively analyzed, so once again we'll steer clear of castling and instead play the move for white 5e5. And with this, we have reached the launching point of our main theme. And we'll give the position diagram 1. Now, the most usual continuation from diagram 1 for black is the immediate counter thrust of d5. But before we consider this as our main theme, I'd like us to look at the two alternatives, 5 knight e4 and 5 knight g4. So from diagram 1, first let's take a look at black 5 knight e4. Most of the older recognized theory recommends for white 6 bishop d5, preventing black from playing d5. However, improvements have been found for black since, creating adequate counterplay elsewhere, and better than 6 bishop d5 for white would seem to castle, when black should reply d5. If instead he played bishop c5, then white queen e2 would win a piece, or if black played knight c5, white would still have the better game. You'll see an illustration of this in my background notes. And after d5, white would continue bishop b5. Here, black could reply bishop d7. When white exchanges on c6, and if black recaptures with the bishop, white would gain a tempo compared with normal lines after knight takes d4, when black, if he wants to save that bishop and keep his queenside pawn structure intact, would have to retreat the bishop to d7 again. After white 7 bishop b5, the most testing reply is black bishop g4 with a pin against the white king's knight. Please switch off and decide on white's next move. In a number of past games, we saw 8h3, and this used to be considered good for white, though one suspects this verdict was rather encouraged by some inaccurate defensive play by black. In reply to black bishop g4, the move I would recommend is 8 queen takes d4. Black bishop c5 attacking the queen, and white queen a4. The obvious looking move for black here is bishop takes f3, weakening the white kingside pawns. But this isn't very good, since after white has recaptured the piece, he's threatening the knight as well as the point c6. So for black, the move 9 bishop d7 is better, guarding against these threats. Black could also here have tried 9 queen d7, but then white has knight b d2, with either knight takes e4 or knight b3 followed by knight d4, which would further reinforce the pressure against c6. So after black bishop d7, white knight c3, black knight takes c3, white b takes c3, black castles, and white bishop g5, we have the position of diagram 1b. Now from diagram 1b, if black continues bishop e7, white bishop takes e7, black queen takes e7, white has rook f e1. And if now black a6, white bishop takes c6, black bishop takes c6, white queen g4, followed by rook a d1, he's got a good position, with rooks controlling the central files. And white may follow this up with knight d4, possibly even knight f5. From diagram 1b, instead of black bishop e7, he might try queen e8, and white rook f e1. Now white is building up a lot of pressure here, and black may be tempted to try and break out of this bind with force. One such attempt would be 13, knight takes e5, but then after white rook takes e5, black bishop takes b5, white has queen b3. Apart from attacking the pawn on d5, white is also threatening a discovered attack on the queen with a knight move, such as knight g6, or perhaps better still knight d3, which incidentally would attack the black rook or dark squared bishop at the same time. And with the black queen temporarily tied down in defense of the light squared bishop, black will find it difficult to guard against all these threats. So I think this line offers white promising chances. From diagram 1b, black queen e8, white rook fe1, black should probably try a6 to try and clarify the position. And after 14, white bishop takes c6, black bishop takes c6, white queen g4, white retains the initiative on the king side. Please return to diagram 1, and this time add black 5 knight g4. Now what should white reply to this? One possibility is castles, when it would be risky for black to capture the e-pawn because of that pin along the e-file. However, black could reply d6, and this seems to give him a nice comfortable game. Now white shouldn't underestimate this line, and to show you what can happen if white is not prepared, we'll play through a game Reagan against Paul Littlewood. To the best of my knowledge, this game was played at an annual intervarsity match between Oxford and Cambridge in 1978. After black knight g4, white continued with queen e2, black queen e7, white bishop f4. So far all standard theory. Please switch off here and study the position. Estrin's book on the two knights defense, which has been the recognized authority on this opening, concentrates almost entirely on the reply d6. This tends to favor white, basically due to black's weak central pawns after the exchange of queens, and in my background notes you will find a brief summary of this theory. Also, the move f6 for black instead of d6 is mentioned briefly in passing, but once again after white e takes f6 and the exchange of queens, white gets the better of it. Now Paul Littlewood came up with a complete novelty here, like a bolt out of the blue, when he played the move black b5. Now very often, when confronted with shock tactics, ordinary mortals will make a mistake, and masters and grandmasters certainly are not immune from this either. And here white certainly shouldn't have accepted the pawn, but Reagan swallowed the bait and did. And after white bishop takes b5, black queen b4 check, we see all of a sudden that white stands to lose material. In the game followed white 9c3, black d takes c3, white knight takes c3, and black queen takes f4, winning a piece. In desperation, white continued knight d5 and black queen h6, and maybe white could have held out a little longer with knight takes c7 check and the fork. What he played instead proved instant suicide when he castled, which black promptly met with knight d4, to which there is no answer. So from diagram 1, black 5 knight g4, white queen e2, black queen e7, and white bishop f4, black b5, white should decline the pawn sacrifice with bishop b3, and if now black queen b4 check, white bishop d2, black queen c5, and white castles, and this should ensure him some advantage. The capture of the e-pawn now looks rather risky for black. Say after black knight g takes e5, white knight takes e5, black knight takes e5, white rook e1, black d6, white f4, black d3 check, white queen f2, white stands to gain material. Once again, please return to diagram 1 and add the move d5 for black. This will now be our main theme for the rest of the cassette. The move d5 is logical for black as it claims some hold on the center and also attacks a piece by which black hopes to gain some time. If now white decides to exchange minor pieces in the center, this looks reminiscent of what usually happens in the Max Lange, though with the black king's bishop still uncommitted, might count as a point in black's favor. So white avoids this exchange of pieces and instead plays 6 bishop b5. And this is a belated pin against the black queen's knight and will ensure him the regain of his pawn, since black must do something about his knight, threatened on f6. Incidentally, note that if black here tries to be too clever and plays 6 bishop b4 check, then after 7 c3, black d takes c3, 8 b takes c3, black queen e7, white castles, black finds 2 of his pieces en prise at the same time and can't really do anything about it. So after 6 bishop b5, black will almost invariably continue with knight e4. But before we examine this in detail, let us briefly look at the other knight moves. I think we can dismiss 6 knight g4 for black, since white can then kick away this knight immediately with h3, forcing it onto an unfavorable square. However, there's another move, 6 knight d7, and though on the surface less aggressive than knight e4, this deserves some attention. Incidentally, the first time I came across this move was back in the 60s, when my late brother Ernst, who was quite a useful chess player, tried it out against me in a friendly game. The point of the move is that white cannot here, of course, immediately recapture on d4, since this would lose the e-pawn. So, logical is 7 castles for white, and we'll give this diagram 2. From diagram 2, black has tried the move 7 knight b6, but after 8 knight takes d4, black bishop d7, 9 e6, black f takes e6, 10 bishop takes c6, black bishop takes c6, and 11 knight takes e6, black queen d6, 12 bishop f4, white had the better position in a Russian correspondence game played some 20 years ago. So from diagram 2, black will probably have to play a bishop move, either bishop e7 or bishop c5. Just to prove that white can't afford to take this too lightly, we'll take a look at a variation which up to now has been recommended as good for white. And after black bishop e7 from diagram 2, continue with 8 bishop takes c6, black b takes c6, and 9 e6. This, I think, would rebound on white, since after black f takes e6, white knight takes d4, and black knight b8, an unexpected retreat, but good, white has rook e1, black castles, white knight takes e6, black bishop takes e6, white rook takes e6, and black bishop c5, and this would leave the white pieces rather uncoordinated, with the white rook at least temporarily stranded in no man's land. From diagram 2, again add black bishop e7. A better plan for white is bishop f4. If now black castles, white rook e1 followed by knight takes d4, retaining the light-squared bishop. Also from diagram 2, black can try bishop c5. Against this, white has bishop g5, and after black bishop e7, white bishop takes c6. Black is left with a choice which bishop to take, but if he captures on g5, then white has knight takes d4, and if black b takes c6, white knight takes c6, traps the black queen. If instead of bishop takes g5, black plays b takes c6, then again white counters this with knight takes d4 and the same threat, and black is in trouble here. He can't castle because knight takes c6 with a fork would win the black bishop on e7, and if instead he plays bishop b7, white has e6 with the black king stuck in the center. Okay, from diagram 1, black d5, white bishop b5. Let's now take a look at black knight e4, the standard reply. White knight takes d4, and black bishop d7. We'll leave the sharp tactical alternative for black bishop c5 to the end of our cassette. Although after black bishop d7, white normally proceeds with bishop takes c6, the alternative knight takes c6 is possible as well, and I've given an example of this against strong opposition in my background notes. Back to white 8, bishop takes c6. If black recaptures with the bishop, white can either then castle with the idea of bishop e3, or simply continue with knight takes c6, leaving black with a weakened queen side. In effect, after white bishop takes c6, we very rarely see the reply bishop takes c6, and normally black will play b takes c6, and after white 9 castles, we have the position of diagram 3. This is a standard position, and from here there are a vast number of variations and sub-variations to be considered, depending on black's next move. We will examine all these variations, and will do so in the following order. A. Black, 9 c5. B. 9 bishop e7. C. 9 knight c5. D. 9 queen h4. And E. 9 g6. Now the last 3 of these variations are highly irregular and unusual, but this doesn't mean that we should ignore them altogether. We have already seen that this kind of approach can be very dangerous, and I intend to treat each line on its own merits, whether it's rare or whether it's in vogue, and then proceed with a recognized move for black, bishop c5. And from diagram 3, let's kick off with black 9 c5. In some ways, I'm surprised that this isn't seen more often. The underlying logic is that black is trying to open out the position for his 2 bishops, at the same time trying to straighten out his weakened queenside pawns and gain some time by attacking the white knight on d4. After this, white has to retreat his knight to b3, and now the black d-pawn has to be covered. The most solid way for black to do this is the move c6, for if instead he tried c4, then the immediate queen takes d5 would be good for white. However, the move c6 has the one drawback of fixing the black pawns and creating rather a heavy center. White then could continue with 11c4, which leaves black with rather an unenviable choice. He could capture the pawn on c4, but by doing so would saddle himself with isolated triple pawns along the c-file, which would be unwelcome. Whereas if instead of capturing he played 11d4, white 12f3, black knight g5, 13f4, black knight e6, and 14f5, followed by e6, this would allow white one of those direct attacks which are very typical of this type of opening, with tempo gains all along the line as each time a black piece is attacked with every pawn move. And we shall come across this kind of maneuver in some of the later variations. So we're beginning to see what is probably the basic reason why this particular strategy for black has not caught on. Let's return to diagram 3, again add the move 9c5 for black, and see if black can find another way of allowing his minor pieces more scope. After the move 10 white knight b3, this time let's try for black 10 bishop c6, and white 11 f3, black knight g5, and now 12 knight a5. And this looks odd, but is once again quite an effective move. For we see that if black replies 12 bishop b5, white has the move c4, and if black captures on c4, he's again landed with these triple pawns. But worse still, white will then exchange queens, and this leaves the black knight on g5 unguarded, so white would win a piece. So after knight a5, black must retreat his bishop to d7. But now white queen takes d5, wins a pawn, and rather wrecks black's position. From diagram 3, add black c5, white knight b3, and black may try and hold his position with bishop e6. But he finds he really needs this square for his knight. And after the move f3 by white, black knight g5, white h4, there is no square the black knight can go to. Next, from diagram 3, I'd like us to look at the move bishop e7 for black. And we'll follow one of my own games played back in 1962 in an inter-club match for Leicester against Birmingham. I was white, and my opponent, George Taylor, was one of the leading players in the Midlands at the time. Now, there are a number of interesting aspects to this game which are worth mentioning. Firstly, things were going rather well for me then. I had just qualified for the following year's British Championships for the first time. Secondly, the game itself is the only example of mine I can recall where a direct queen sacrifice at the end forced a sequence of moves leading to mate. And thirdly, just about that time, although I only discovered this much later, our entire system upon which this game is based was analyzed in great detail in a whole series of articles in Schachmaty Bulletin. And when these were eventually published, I found to my surprise that after black's move 15, the identical position had occurred in a Russian master game, though this must have been played sometime after my game against Taylor. got the benefit as well of their analysis, which I could link up with my own ideas. Now, as you see, the game itself is quite short. It only lasted 25 moves, but it's often these short games with early tactical complications that require the most detailed attention and analysis. So what I propose to do is to examine this game in relation to our system in two stages. First of all, we'll play it through once, only with brief comments, and then expand into the possible digressions from move 15 onwards. Then, when we've done this, we'll go back again to move 9 and have a look again at all the ifs and buts that might have happened between move 11 and 14 and might or might not have altered the course of events. In conjunction with my game against Taya, I'm providing two diagrams, and these will be of help at the critical points. When I first looked at the position bishop e7, I thought it was a bit passive. But the more I examined it, the more it began to dawn on me that the possibilities for White's kingside attack were very good indeed, and how often within the scope of a few routine moves it can build up a position which is almost impossible to defend. So, from the position in front of you, that is after Black has played bishop e7, I continued against Taya with the recommended move 10 f3. Black to this replied knight c5. He could also have played knight g5, but since this would only lead to transpositions with few options for Black, there wasn't really much point in it. And after the move knight c5, White continued with 11 f4. And here we have the position of diagram 4. We'll stay with the move Black castles, 12 f5, and Black knight e4. Now, you remember, I already referred to this kind of maneuver in the previous variation, and pointed out that it is in some ways quite typical of many lines in our system for White to take 3 successive moves to advance his f-pawn from f2 to f5, which normally could be done in 2 moves. However, I don't think this is really of any great importance, since each white pawn move carries a certain threat. And, if anything, White gains rather than loses time in the process. So after knight e4, I continued with White with 13 knight b to d2. In my opinion, Black's position here is already precarious. Now, in case you think it's a bit optimistic for White to talk in terms of a win so early in the game, let me assure you it can't be far off. Alternatively, White could also have played his knight to c3 instead of knight d2. And I will provide you with some Shakmati-based analysis in my analytical section of my background notes. Anyway, after knight b d2, Black replied c5, White 14 knight e2, Black knight takes d2, and 15 White queen takes d2. So with this, we have reached our second diagram position, diagram 5, and we'll revert to this several times. Black replied bishop c6. And here, I would like you to switch off and decide on white's next move. Well, I wonder what you've come up with. The commentators to the Russian game give the move 16 f6. And this indeed seems strong, for after black g takes f6, white would continue queen h6, and if black then captures on e5, white has the enviable choice of either continuing his kingside attack or simply capturing the black bishop on c6, which will leave him a piece up. In the game, I missed this and instead played the move queen f4. Black countered with f6 and white 17 e6. Black bishop d6, white 18 queen h4, and black d4. Of course, the protected pass pawn on e6 now is a great asset to white. White bishop f4 and black a5. As you can see, it isn't easy for black to find any constructive moves here. And I continued with 20 a4, intending to bring the queen's rook into play via a3. To this, black replied 20 rook b8, attacking the b pawn, and white rook a3. Black bishop takes f4, and 22 knight takes f4. And black then captured the b pawn, rook takes b2. And once again, please switch off here and decide how white effectively finishes off the game. Well, I gave you a hint earlier on, so by now you've probably guessed it. White sacrifices his queen with 23 queen takes h7 check, black king takes h7, and now everything is forced. 24, rook h3 check, black king g8, 25, knight g6 with mate next move. Please return to diagram 5. Although I suspect by move 15 black has already left it too late, some of the Russian annotators apportioned the blame for black's defeat on the move bishop c6 and tried to find some alternatives in the hope of avoiding immediate disaster. And we'll look at some of these attempts, which of course are equally relevant to my game. And instead of bishop c6 from the diagram, play the move bishop b5 for black. Here, I think the simplest method for white to maintain the momentum of his attack is to play a4, black bishop takes e2, white queen takes e2, and black bishop g5. But we can see that black's attempts to simplify the position by exchanging off minor pieces hasn't really got him anywhere. For after white bishop takes g5, black queen takes g5, white rook a3, white still has a ready-made attack. From diagram 5, another try for black would be the move c6, but this is a bit slow. White could build up pressure with b3, black rook e8, white queen f4, black bishop f8, white bishop b2, and black d4. Black really can't avoid this last pawn move, since he must shut out the potentially dangerous white queen's bishop. But now white has rook ae1, and this gives him the edge. The black queenside pawns are very ragged, and white also has a chance for a direct kingside attack. One other possible suggestion for black from diagram 5 is the move rook e8. With this, black is offering his d-pawn to free his position. Say white plays queen takes d5, black would have bishop b5, hoping either to force the exchange of queens or gain some compensation with a pin on the white knight to create more activity for his pieces at the expense of a pawn. Now, it may be better not to capture on d5, but if you as white decide you want to do so, you may like to spend some time working out the variations for yourself. Presumably, one point of black's move rook e8 is that if white does not capture on d5, black has vacated the square f8 for his bishop, which would prevent white from directly breaking through on the dark squares. At the same time, black would at least partially contest the e-file where the white pressure is focused. However, against rook e8, white has knight g3, and if black bishop f8, white queen f4, black queen e7, white rook e1, and he will follow this up with bishop d2, with threats of f6 and knight h5, directly attacking the black king. On the other hand, if black tries to prevent white from playing f6 by playing f6 himself, then white advances his e-pawn to e6, and this becomes a very dangerous protected pass pawn, as in my game against Taya. So we see that in this variation too, white will keep a distinct advantage. And we may safely conclude that black's rescue attempts, by the time we get to move 15, are too late, and so we need to look for earlier improvements. Please turn to diagram 4. One possible idea for black may be to reply knight e4 at once and delay castling, so if white meets knight e4 with the move f5, black will play either c5 or bishop c5. Now, if he plays c5, white has knight b3, and this isn't really so good for black, it doesn't help his cause. So let's look at the move black bishop c5. White can exploit the uncastled black king position with advancing his pawn to e6 straight away. This temporarily sacrifices a pawn. After black f takes e6, white f takes e6, and black bishop takes e6. And now white has the move queen h5 check. And if g6, white queen e5, black bishop takes d4 check, white queen takes d4, black is rather in disarray, his rook is attacked, and he's got pawn weaknesses everywhere. In reply to queen h5 check, instead of black g6, black may prefer to play king d7, hoping to find a hideout for his king in the center without weakening himself on the king side. Even so, it would seem that after bishop e3, white can get a good position. Black queen e7, white knight c3, black knight takes c3, and white b takes c3. Black rook a f8, and now white rook f e1, an annoying move which threatens the bishop on e6 with an indirect pin on the black queen behind it. So this really exposes the insecure posting of black's king, and if you examine the position for yourselves, you will see how extremely difficult it is for black to find a satisfactory continuation. Another try for black from diagram 4 is the move f6. Now here, white could again charge ahead with f5 as before and establish his passed pawn on e6. For if black is indiscreet enough to counter f5, with f takes e5, white then has queen h5 check, black king f8, and now white knight e6 check, which is killing a fork against the queen, and the white knight cannot be captured because a forced mate in 2 would follow. So this move f5 would be a good move, However, possibly even stronger from diagram 4, add black f6, is the move for white b4, which we shall also come across again in later variations. If now black knight e6, white knight takes e6, black bishop takes e6, white f5, black bishop c8, white e6, and black g6, this is necessary to prevent queen h5 check. White now has this move queen g4, an excellent move defending the b pawn and attacking the weak point on g6 at the same time. Now black must defend with rook g8, which of course forfeits castling rights, and then white can maintain his pressure with queen h4. So from diagram 4, add black f6, white b4, black really has to try that other knight move, knight e4. And again white e6, black bishop c8, and white f5, with the threat of queen h5 check. Black has to stop this, so h5. But now white plays bishop e3. If black captures with his bishop on b4, this is far too dangerous, for after white knight takes c6, black queen d6, white knight takes b4, black queen takes b4, white queen takes d5, and this extra pawn in conjunction with a better position should prove conclusive. So after bishop e3, black really must do something about the threat knight takes c6. But if he plays c5, this still allows white to move knight c6 with the fork against bishop and queen, and if black tries to prevent this with bishop b7, this turns out to be very passive. White then has a choice. He could either let the b-pawn go and play rook f3 and rook h3, winning the h-pawn, or continue positionally with queen e1, first defending the b-pawn, and then follow up with knight b3 and the usual bind on the queen side. One other attempt from diagram 4 might be to play knight e6 for black at once, and we'll take a brief look at this. It doesn't seem to offer much hope though, since after white f5, black knight takes d4, white queen takes d4, black castles, and white f6, black g takes f6, white e takes f6, black bishop d6, and white 16, queen h4. The white attack is just about irresistible. Or again, from diagram 4, add black knight e6, white 12 f5, and black knight takes d4, 13 queen takes d4, black queen b8, 14 e6, black f takes e6, 15 queen takes g7, black rook f8, 16 bishop h6, and black's position again is ruined. So the move knight e6 for black in this position doesn't hold out much hope, nor is the move g6 from diagram 4 any better. Black's attempts of preventing white from advancing his pawn to f5 are brushed aside, for white will still continue with 12 f5, and black g takes f5, and then 13 queen h5, leaves white with a multiplicity of threats, and black with a shattered position, quite unable to cope with them all. On the reverse side, we will examine one last attempt by black to stem the tide. Now please turn over. The two knights defend, and how white should deal with it effectively. Fine, 2. From what we have seen in variations where black plays it is reasonable to assume that he should try and prevent white's pawn advance to f5 if at all possible. I'd like you now to set up the pieces again as in diagram 4, and we'll examine such an attempt by black and add the move f5 straight away. With this move, he throws out the gauntlet to his opponent, inviting him to capture en passant, which doesn't seem to be particularly good, since it relinquishes any attempt of having pressure on the black position. That's why, of course, in variations from diagram 4, where black played the move f6, the capture on f6 was not recommended. Nor does the move e6 achieve anything for white in reply to black f5. Probably, white just stands to lose a pawn without any worthwhile compensation. So I'd like you to switch off and decide what white should do. Now you remember me referring to this alternative maneuver, b4, which I mentioned on the first side, and this comes in quite handy here. And once again, after this, black is left with a choice of two knight moves, either knight e4 or knight e6. And we'll look at knight e6 first. White is offered a pawn, which he accepts, so knight takes f5, and black in turn plays bishop takes b4. And now white retreats his knight to g3. Now what is black going to do here? All the usual white threats seem to be on the card, so it has to be something sharp, and two lines have in fact been suggested. So let's first look at 14, black queen h4, 15, c3, and black bishop a5. Whether in this variation the move bishop c5 check would have been any better is open to question. Anyway, we'll look at that in a moment. Now, of course, white 16 f5, black knight c5, and we see that that knight is really being buffeted about, and after 17 e6, I don't think we need to go much further. With white well on top, it is a matter of technique to clinch the win. So once again, please, diagram 4. Add f5 for black, b4 for white, knight e6 for black, knight takes f5 for white, bishop takes b4 for black, and knight g3 for white. Many players, I suppose, will never neglect a free check on principle. So let's have a brief look at black bishop c5 check. White king h1, black castles. White f5, and now black knight d4. Once again, white obtains a strong attack with the move e6. And after black 17, bishop c8, the black position is very passive, and white can build up his attack with such moves as bishop b2, kicking away the knight first to a bad square, and then queen g4, threatening mate, and if black attempts to block that mate with d4 as he must, then white has knight h5 as a very useful follow-up. So I don't think that this move knight e6 for black is very good in conjunction with f5, and once again please turn to diagram 4. We'll add the move f5 for black, white d4, and this time let's try the more natural looking reply for black knight e4. And this is certainly a better attempt, and white should treat it with some care. So the move e6 is still okay for white, and black must again retreat his bishop to c8. But this time the capture of black's c-pawn, though tempting, is not the best. And I certainly wouldn't recommend it. We shall see in a moment what is white's best plan here, course, must save his queen, so queen d6, and white continues with knight takes e7. Well, what now? Please switch off and study the position. Instead of going for the automatic recapture with queen takes e7, black here interpolates the move queen b6 check. This is a very good move. White, king h1, and now black king takes e7. Now the move queen takes d5 looks tempting for white, but it isn't really very good. For black will then continue knight f2 check, and white will have to sacrifice the exchange to avoid the smothered mate. But with the white queen side undeveloped, this is very much in black's favor. So after the move black king takes e7, white queen e1 is necessary. And now black has another good move, queen d4, threatening the white rook. White c3 and black queen f6, cleverly switching the queen onto the king side to consolidate his defense. White then bishop e3 and black queen takes e6. But all of a sudden we see how black's minor pieces are going to control some very useful squares. The black knight, from its strong outpost on e4, effectively will deny white any access to the black king position. And if now, say, white continues bishop d4, black king f7, white knight d2, black bishop a6, this bishop too controls a useful diagonal. And once this position has been reached, I should certainly say that black has achieved complete equality. So this serves as a warning for white not to rush things and neglect his development. So from diagram 4, add f5 for black, d4 for white, knight e4 for black, white e6, black bishop c8. And now a much better plan for white is the natural move bishop b2, still keeping the two unguarded black pawns on c6 and f5 under observation, and maintaining the general advantage he has achieved out of the opening. Right, now we're going to leave this section, and I'll ask you once more to return to diagram 3. Before we go into the main line, let's take a look at some of those unusual lines I referred to on side 1 of the cassette. And first, we'll examine the move black knight c5 from the diagram. This really can't be very good, since it ignores the development of the black king's bishop. But someone must have experimented with it somewhere. In reply, white can gain a tempo with an immediate f4, and if black f5, there is an interesting bayonet type of gambit with g4. And black has to take that pawn, f takes g4, and then white has f5 followed by e6. 22 Knight's defense quotes several examples with this variation where black plays g6 from diagram 3, and we will follow a Russian game between Shipov and Solznev played Moscow 1964, where white continued 10 f3, black knight c5, white f4, black knight e6, and white f5, black knight takes d4. So, once again we see how the familiar pattern of the three successive white pawn moves emerges. And on move 13, white continued queen takes d4, and black bishop takes f5. Okay, so far so good. At least we can see the point of black's plan, for without the preparatory move g6, he couldn't of course have contemplated the capture on f5. So you will want to switch off here and consider what white has got for the pawn he sacrificed, and also how he intends to carry on. The move that springs to mind is 14e6, and this was actually played in the game. Now, if black plays rook g8, white says e takes f7 check, and after black king takes f7, white g4 looks like winning a piece. So black does not play rook g8, but instead f6. White 15 knight c3, black bishop g7, and white rook e1 guarding the e-pawn, and black queen e7 putting another piece on it. So from here, what is white going to do now? Remember, the onus is on him to maintain the momentum, especially as he's a pawn down. So he plays the move queen a4, and black queen c5 check, white 18 bishop e3, black queen c4. So obviously, black would have been prepared to submit himself here to isolated triple pawns along the c file if white only would exchange queens. But it's interesting that white avoids this and finds a stronger move with 19 queen a5. And again, I'd like you to switch off and consider black's reply to this one. His position, I think, is rather dicey, as not only is the white queen getting very active amongst the enemy camp, but also there is a positional threat of bishop c5 which would prevent black from castling. In fact, black's choice here was what many average club players would have opted for without a second thought, and he played a move d4, forking the two pieces. However, to do this, you need your king in safety, and here black simply cannot afford to take liberties. Once again, please switch off, and find a good move for white to counter this finesse. And white, of course, plays 20 queen takes c7, black castles, and now 21 queen f4. You must have worked that one out beforehand. And with a pin against the black queen, black cannot, of course, capture either of the threatened pieces and has to defend his d-pawn with c5. At this point, I think white has already a strong initiative, and the question is how he can convert this into a clear winning position. Switch off and try and discover for yourselves. And the move he chooses is 22 e7. Black, then rook f to e8, and now a simple move, 23 bishop d2, guarding the e-pawn with the rook, and at the same time escaping the fork. If black doesn't do something quickly now, he's going to get crushed. White is threatening such moves as d3, for instance, followed by either knight d5 or knight b5. And of course, once that knight gets in on c7 or d6, it's curtains. Also, of course, as a subsidiary effect, those squares are also available for the white He's really running out of steam here. I suppose he still vaguely thought of the possibility of perhaps grabbing the white knight after chasing away the queen. So a good move is called for by white, and white indeed finds it. He plays 25 queen f2. Now, if black now captures the knight, he finds that he can't really do that, so after d takes c3, white has rook takes c2 with another pin against the queen. So he decides to play the move d3 instead. But now, all of a sudden, white's task is easy. He plays 26 queen f5, and all these threats I mentioned earlier have become a reality. With the black queen's bishop out of play, there is no way of preventing white from getting his knight to d5, after which the black position quickly falls apart. Right, so at long last, we are ready for the main line, and I'd like you to turn back to diagram 3 again and add the move for black, bishop c5. With this move, the black king's bishop is more actively placed along a useful diagonal, and white really must contest this diagonal with bishop e3. Now, if you compare this with the previous line, where black was content to develop his king's bishop on e7, you will see that one reason why the white attack gained in momentum against the more passive setup was that white was given too much scope and time to carry out his plan, to storm his pawn through to f5, gaining a tempo by leaving the queen's bishop on its original square. Also in variations, where black managed to stop white from advancing to f5, white still had that move b4, which came in handy, gaining a tempo by driving the knight away from c5. And before black knew what was happening, he was faced with the threat of either e6 with that crippling pass pawn, or f6 with that dangerous attack against the king. Now, with the black bishop on c5 instead of the knight, none of this is likely to happen, and the subsequent game will assume quite a different character. Black will probably have the option also, after he's retreated his knight to e6, to clarify the position somewhat by exchanging one or a couple of minor pieces on the square b4. Whether or not this is good is another matter, but white must at least take this possibility into account. And he'll need to rethink his strategy in terms of the conditions. Now, there are some weaknesses here in black's game we should note. First of all, there is a weakness in black's pawn structure on the queen side. Secondly, with his bishop on c5, this may block the path for the black c-pawn to occupy that square later, and indirectly help white to gain control there when he posts and consolidates his knight on c5. And thirdly, the black knight, when attacked, will have to retreat to g5 this time, and it's not particularly well posted there, since white will immediately play the move f4 and push it away again. Okay, so we have weighed up some of the pros and cons of this move bishop c5 from diagram 3. Let's now look at some concrete examples from practical games. As the move bishop e3 for white, and first we look at the reply for black's castling, a natural enough move which I have met in several of my recent games. But, as we shall see, probably it's not the best for black. White then continues with 11f3, black knight g5, and we'll give this position diagram 6. From diagram 6, the most direct continuation for white seems 12f4, black knight e4, white 13 knight d2, black knight takes d2, 14 white queen takes d2, then has rook f4 and black queen h5, white queen c3. What I like about this is how white manages to combine his queenside strategy, which entails control of c5 and the blockade of the weak black queenside pawns, with pressure along the e file and constant threats of a direct kingside attack, especially along the f file, where he may later double or even treble up his major pieces. Black here then replied with a move rook e6. He must do something to blockade the white e-pawn and try at least to bring his queen's rook into play. And here please switch off and guess white's next move. I suppose he had several options on the king's side along the lines we've just mentioned, but the move he chooses is 21a4. And this is interesting, as it still tightens the grip even further on the queen's side, threatening a5. Well, black here decides he may as well at least make a token attempt of counter-attacking, if only by way of a gesture, and he plays the move rook h6. White, 22 queen g3, and black rook g6. Superficially, this is okay, but now white has another very clever move, and again you may like to have a guess at it. And the move he plays is queen f2. This then is a switch onto that f file, and in fact he's actually threatening mate here, and black has to do something about it, so he plays the move h6. And now 24a5. And after the exchange of bishops, white really has the ideal textbook position. There is no longer a pin, and knight occupies the square c5, and if it ever came to an ending, this would be a good knight against the bad bishop. And also, of course, he has the ready-made open f file, where the three major pieces are in complete command. So his advantage here is very considerable, and it's hard to see how black can gain any worthwhile counterplay at all. So this is a very instructive illustration of how to handle this variation where black castles in conjunction with bishop c5. I would predict that you will come across this method of defense in your own games, and from diagram 6, there are of course various other ways too white can choose apart from 12f4. One such example, mentioned by F-Trim, is queen d2, and in my game against Ian MacDonald at the Nottingham Congress 1985, I played the move knight c3. My intention was to leave the black knight stranded on g5, and not surprisingly, black on his next move voluntarily retreated it to e6, and white then continued with 13 king h1. Apart from moving out of the pin, white now threatens to win a piece. For if it was white to play, he would simply continue knight takes e6, attacking the queen with the black bishop still loose. So black here is forced to exchange in the center, which he does. He plays bishop takes d4, white bishop takes d4, black c5, and white bishop f2. Now, although black seems to have achieved one of his objectives, that is to occupy c5 with a pawn, we can see that his position isn't particularly good. The center immediately will have to be defended again. In fact, black decides here on the move d4. I think c6 may have been a shade better. And after d4, again, we see this rather awkward pawn structure, which is often a handicap to black in all these variations, and not really to be recommended. And after d4, white here played the move knight e4, posting his knight on a very active square. Black bishop c6 attacks the knight, white 17 rook e1, black queen e7, and now 18 white queen d2. And here black decides swap off the knight. Bishop takes e4, white rook takes e4, and black plays the move queen g5. Now, black would like to exchange queens here, simplify the position, and naturally white doesn't oblige. 20 f4, and black then plays the move queen f5, and now 21 queen e2. Black here plays h5, and white the move h3. Now already, of course, white is a very strong position, and he offers a pawn here, and black is very ill advised to take, but he did take it in the game, and we'll quickly see what happens. Black knight takes f4, and white now queen f3, naturally imposing that very awkward pin and threatening a piece, and black has to play g5. Now this, of course, is terribly weakening on his king side, and after 24, bishop g3, this is the simplest. And here black thought for a long time before resigning. But if you think this is premature, it isn't really. White will regain his pawn now, and black's king side is demolished. In addition to his pawn weaknesses on the queen side, he just thought it was too much to put up with. So it was probably really a matter of time. And this method of play too ensures white a good game. Please turn again to diagram 3 and add bishop c5 for black, white bishop e3, and this time we'll look at a move for black bishop b6. A move that has its points. It's not unfamiliar. Black is prepared to give up the tempo. In return, he hopes to consolidate his bishop on the good diagonal, and if white is ever obliged to exchange on b6, this would enable black to straighten out his pawns on the queen side and eliminate any long-term weaknesses in these quarters. In some lines too, he may still hope to advance his pawn to c5. Now, if black could carry out all this in practice, things would be fine for him. So what I'm going to do here is to show you one very sharp example how white tackled this system in a Russian game, and then let you judge for yourselves. In that game, white decided to continue with an immediate knight d2, so in reply to bishop b6, knight d2, and this, I think, here is better than f3, for if black decided to retreat his knight to g5, for instance, white would gain a tempo by hitting the knight at once with f4. So black does not retreat the knight, but swaps on d2, 11 black knight takes d2, white queen takes d2, black castles, and white bishop g5. This is a logical move, for black cannot really afford to weaken himself with the move f6. So he must play queen e8, and now white rook f to e1, and black c5. And here I would like you to switch off and study this position for quite a while. Now you will recognize that the feature of the position is that white is in control of the dark squares. And with the black king's bishop at least temporarily out of play, he decides to go for the direct attack. And he plays the move bishop f6. And this puts black in a dilemma. If he captures the knight, white has queen g5, and this will win very quickly. If instead he captures the bishop, white simply plays e takes f6, attacking the queen, and also threatening mating too. So black plays h6, at least preventing the immediate threat of queen g5. If instead he had played king h8, then white bishop takes g7 check, king takes g7, white queen g5 check, black king h8, white queen f6 check, black king g8, and white rook e3, black bishop g4, white rook g3, black h5, and white knight f5 would force a mate. So after black's move h6, how should white press home his pressure, replied king h8. And if you study my background note, you will see how white managed to win quite brilliantly with just queen and knight against black's overwhelming material superiority. From diagram 7 again, let's see if black move g6 is any better. Add white knight f3 and black c4, attacking both the white queen and rook, and then white knight g5 check. The white knight, of course, can't be captured because of white rook h3 check, black bishop takes h3, white queen takes h3 check, leading to mate. So after knight g5 check, black king g8, and white rook h3, and this is the position of diagram 7b. With 3 white pieces on prees, you'll want to switch off and study the variations. If h takes g5, white rook h8 is mate. If c takes d3, white rook takes h6 and mate next move. If h5, white rook takes h5, and now if black grabs the queen, he's mated on h8, or if he grabs the rook, he's mated on h7. Also from diagram 7b, if black queen takes e5, white bishop takes e5, black c takes d3, white rook takes h6, black f6, white rook takes g6 check, black king h8, and white bishop takes f6 check wins the exchange with a 1 endgame. And finally, from diagram 7b, if black bishop takes h3, white queen takes h3, and black h5 is very weakening. So white can then build up his attack with rook e1 followed by e6 with more than enough compensation for the exchange. Please turn again to diagram 3. Add bishop c5 for black, bishop e3 for white, and now queen e7 for black. This move was played against me in a county match last year between Leicestershire and Kent by Roland O'Kelly, a strong player graded in the region of 220. With it, black intends to challenge the white advanced pawn on e5 at once, and if he can force white to exchange this pawn, he will have good chances of equalizing. And with this in mind, black will also play an early f6 to achieve his objective. Now, I should say, this is probably black's sharpest attempt of trying to equalize at an early stage, and white should react energetically. Against O'Kelly, I continued with 11 f3 and black knight g5. Here, Estrin also mentions the possible alternative for black knight d6, but with correct play, I think white can keep at least a slight edge against this too. And after black knight g5, white 12 queen d2, black castled. I must admit, this last move came rather as a surprise. Of course, black couldn't have captured on e5 because of the fork with f4, but I had expected such moves as knight e6 or f6 or even h6. And after black castles, you may like to switch off and decide on white's reply. The move I played, 13 king h1, was in fact not the best. It's rather slow, and black took full advantage of this. He managed to exchange a minor piece in the center, and very quickly after this also forced the exchange of queens. So, in a simplified middle game with bishops of opposite colors, a draw was soon agreed, in a position still a shade better for white. So, instead of king h1 for white, I wonder what improvement you have come up with. There is a straightforward white bishop takes g5, and after black bishop takes d4 check, white queen takes d4, black queen takes g5, white f4. White undoubtedly has some advantage both in space on the king side and on account of black's weakened pawns on the queen side. Now, someone pointed this out to me after the match, and if I'd realized at the time how strong it was, I would undoubtedly have played it. After black has castled, instead of bishop takes g5, there's also another possibility for white. On move 13, he could play rook e1. And I'd like us to follow a couple of variations here on tape with this interesting method. Black will reply f6. This fits in with his plan. And white, knight c3. Obviously, white would gain nothing from capturing on either f6 or g5. Now, since white hasn't captured the pawn on f6, supposing black now decided he wanted to grab this important central pawn for himself and continued with 14f takes e5, switch off and decide on white's reply. White will continue with bishop takes g5 and will give this diagram 8. From diagram 8, let's first look at black 15e takes d4. If white captures the black queen, black regains his opponent's queen with dividends. So instead of rook takes e7 or bishop takes e7, white should continue 16 knight takes e4, black d3 check, white king h1, and black can't avoid losing a piece, since his queen will no longer be able to guard the bishop on c5. From diagram 8, the other capture by black, bishop takes d4 check, is better. Even so, after white queen takes d4, black queen takes g5, and white rook takes e5, white has regained his pawn, and with his control of the e5 he has the edge, since black has some weak pawns on the queen side. So from diagram 3, in variations where black plays bishop c5, followed by queen e7, it's not all that easy for black to obtain complete equality. From what we've seen, even with correct defense, white will retain some advantage. And this can easily escalate. The move rook e1, as we just saw, can come in very handy for white. And if we follow the game Sachs against Smejkal in the background section, we have another perfect example of how white can gain a decisive advantage out of the opening, playing rook e1 even earlier on move 11 in reply to black queen e7. Please return to diagram 1, add black d5, white bishop b5, black knight e4, white knight takes d4. And this time we'll look at the continuation 7, bishop c5 for black, which nowadays is quite a popular tactical resource, and we'll give this diagram 9. From diagram 9, what white must not do is to capture on c6. For if, for instance, white knight takes c6, black has bishop takes f2 check, white king f1, black queen h4, white knight d4 check, black c6, white knight f3, black knight g3 check, white king takes f2, black knight e4 check, white king e2, black queen f2 check, white king d3, and now black bishop f5 gives him a winning advantage, with the white king forced right out into the open without any protection. So from diagram 9, white has two moves. He can castle and omit bishop e3, but as you will see from one variation given in my background notes, this may lead to rather an unclear position. A better idea for white is the move bishop e3 from diagram 9. And if black bishop d7, white bishop takes c6, black b takes c6, white 10 castles, this will transpose into one of the lines we've just discussed when black plays bishop c5 on move 9. It used to be assumed that instead of white's last move when he castled, he could also have played f3. But didn't work out too well after black queen h4 check. If now white g3, black knight takes g3, white bishop f2, black queen h3, white bishop takes g3, we see that white has won a piece. But it isn't going to do him much good. For after black queen g2, white has a thoroughly lost position. Not only does he have to give the piece back, but there is no way at all of finding a defense. So really white has to castle first. From diagram 9, again add white bishop e3. Now if black here castles at once, this is not correct. But it's a tricky line and very easy for white to go wrong, and you'll need to know the correct method of refuting it. So, play for white, knight takes c6, black b takes c6, white bishop takes c5, black knight takes c5, and then white bishop takes c6. Now, supposing black decides to throw all caution to the wind and sacrifice the exchange, this in fact is unsound, but it's tricky and easy for white to go wrong, so you need to know the correct way of handling it. So black continues with bishop a6, stopping white from castling, and white knight c3. And here, black's best try is d4. If instead of d4, he played queen g5, white has queen d4, and if then black queen takes g2, white castles, and he's safe. Or again, if instead of d4, black plays rook b8, with second thoughts about sacrificing the exchange, white queen takes d5, black queen takes d5, white bishop takes d5, black rook takes b2, and again white castles on the queen side, and will keep a sound extra pawn. So after black d4, this then is the right moment for white to capture the rook. So white bishop takes a8, and black queen takes a8. He could here also play d takes c3, and this too would win for white. And again, you can follow the analysis from my background notes. And after black queen takes a8, white queen takes d4, black rook d8 would be one last cunning trap, apparently leaving a piece en prise as he attacks the white queen. Now, if white were to take the knight, this would lose to queen takes g2. So the correct move here for white is queen g4 followed by rook d1 with a winning advantage. Once again from diagram 9, please add white bishop e3, black castles, white knight takes c6, black b takes c6, white bishop takes c5, black knight takes c5, and white bishop takes c6. Here, black may decide to save his queen's rook and not sacrifice the exchange, in which case he'll play rook b8. And after white 12 castles, we have the position of diagram 10. Relatively best for black here is rook takes b2, white bishop takes d5, black queen e7, white rook e1, black rook d8, white knight c3, black c6, and white queen c1, which is an important move in this variation. Black then retreats the rook to b6, and now white bishop f3 leaves him a pawn up with a sound position. But even worse for black from diagram 10 would be black bishop e6 as played against me in a recent match, and I'll refer to this in my background notes. And with this I'll sign off, and if you have enjoyed playing through this tape and found it challenging, I hope you will tell your friends all about it.